Kingslayer!
Jaime. My name's Jaime.
The human mind is a labyrinth of emotions. Truly learning anything about yourself can take you years, possibly even decades, of what feels like walking through an endless maze of your own emotions and thoughts, with every minor discovery you make about yourself seemingly leading to just another dead end. And no character in A Song of Ice and Fire better showcases the struggle of walking through that labyrinth than Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister is a man who struggles with identity. When we meet him at the start of Book 1, he seems to be this one-note villain who chucks a child out of a window because he's caught having sex with Cersei, who is his sister. But by the time we get to the end of Book 4, the true cataclysm that is the mental state of Jaime Lannister is fully revealed for us to see. Jaime Lannister's lifelong struggle with identity and change begins at a young age with his father Tywin. Jaime, being born the eldest son of Tywin Lannister, is set to inherit Castle Rock, and Tywin, with his own set of insecurities and expectations, desires for Jaime to be the pinnacle Lannister, a man who puts his house first, and places the Lannister legacy above all else. So Tywin teaches him how to read, and brings him to court in hopes of grooming him to rule through experience and marriage pacts. But Jaime, even as a child, is not the man that Tywin wants him to be. We find out in A Feast for Crows that Jaime was always far more concerned with legendary knights and Cersei than he was anything that his father wanted him to do. When confronted with the reality that he must personally deal with the Blackfish at Riverrun, Jaime reminisces on the first time that he met the Blackfish as a child. Brought to Riverrun by his father Tywin, Jaime was meant to be betrothed to Lysa Tully, but when he was at the dinner, he couldn't care any less about Lysa, and instead just wanted to sit next to and talk to the Blackfish all night, because the Blackfish was a famous knight who Jaime idolized. And this conflict of Jaime wanting to be a knight and Tywin wanting him to be a lord is something that lingers throughout their entire relationship, especially after Jaime joins the Kingsguard. Jaime views the Knights of the Kingsguard as the highest honor. He looks to the likes of Sir Arthur Dayne and Barristan the Bold like they are gods in steel. So he decides he wants to join them in order to become the honorable knight that he aspires to be. But also, he wants to be closer to Cersei since she is going to be at King's Landing. So, he is knighted at the age of 16 and named to the Kingsguard, but not out of pride for the man he was becoming, but because Aerys Targaryen wanted to keep him close, that way he could be used as a hostage against Tywin. And it is during this time, where Jaime serves on Aerys' Kingsguard, that he sees firsthand the monster that was the Mad King, and becomes traumatized by his horrific and deadly actions. We find out in A Clash of Kings that Jaime stood by helpless as he watched Ned's father, Rickard Stark, melt and cook in his armor at the top of the hall, while his son Brandon helplessly strangled himself while trying to reach a sword to cut down his father. Jaime says that thinking about Cersei was all he could do to hold it together. We find out later in A Feast for Crows that Jaime also witnessed Aerys raping his wife Rhaella, and while he wanted to stop it, he was honor-bound, and without the support of the other King's Guard, there was nothing he could really do. Now after a year of dealing with this, Jaime ends up killing the Mad King, and the murder of the Mad King is one of the most complicated moments in Westerosi history. Jaime kills the Mad King for a multitude of reasons. The first one is seemingly simple, and the one that everyone knows. Jaime makes it apparent that if he didn't kill the pyromancers and the Mad King, then they would have blown King's Landing sky high with wildfire. But even with that simple explanation, something doesn't really add up. Killing the pyromancer makes sense, since they are the ones who know and have control over the wildfire, but after killing them, why not just hold the Mad King at sword point until Tywin or someone else arrived? Jaime is one of the best swordsmen in the realm, and Aerys is old as shit, so it wouldn't take much. He could just hold him hostage. Which brings us to the far more complicated explanation as to why Jaime killed him, and the one that he won't even admit to himself. For all of his reasoning, I believe deep down, Jaime killed the Mad King because he wanted to. With the first reason being, I believe, there was a part of Jaime who knew killing the Mad King and handing the crown to Robert or his father would make them proud. Jaime Lannister, due to the ego of his father, has a massive inferiority complex and is constantly looking to others for approval and comfort. So I believe a massive reason that he killed Aerys was simply the fact that his desire to be wanted by his family and the oath he had to them mattered to him more than his oath to the King's Guard. And the other major factor that I believe played a role in Jaime killing the Mad King is that he saw it as justice. Early on in the story, Jaime tells Ned that when the Mad King died, it felt like justice for what he did to Brandon and Rickard. Now at this point, Ned brushes it aside, and upon first read, it's hard to tell if Jaime is being genuine or if he's just messing with Ned. But with context, it's obvious that this was Jaime genuinely trying to find common ground with Ned and getting shot down. Now up until this point, Jaime is already a character who has gone through an incredible amount of change and emotional turmoil. And this is all stuff that happens before the main series. In the main series, our introduction to Jaime is him launching Bran Stark out a window and paralyzing him. And while this is most definitely a rotten action, it's still an emotionally complex one. At first it seems like Jaime and Cersei just get caught and, well, they are bad guys, so they tried to kill the kid in order to keep their secret. But when you put yourself in their shoes, the situation becomes far more complex. And what's great about this is I don't even have to do any analysis here, since Ned did it for me. Jaime and Cersei being caught is a massive deal, not only for them, but for their children. In Book 1, Ned comes to the conclusion that when he tells Robert what has occurred, his fury would be so great that he wouldn't only kill Jaime and Cersei, but the children's lives would be forfeit as well. This would launch the realm into chaos and lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of people. And granted, this is most definitely all Cersei and Jaime's fault due to a lifelong of terrible decision-making, but in this moment, their decisions were their decisions. And is it really fair to Tommen and Marcella that because their parents are terrible, they have to die? My answer is no, and I would hope yours is too. So in this moment, Jaime and Cersei are weighing the weight of their entire family against the life of one child that they hardly know. Ned thinks, while telling Cersei that he knows the truth, that if Cat was placed in a similar situation, he knows she would have done the same thing. So much like the murder of the Mad King, Jaime Lannister finds himself in a position where he is clearly the villain of a narrative, but when analyzed from his perspective, you see that every decision he makes is far more nuanced than just a bad guy doing bad guy shit. Now after Jaime fights Ned in the street, he essentially disappears for the rest of Book 1, until the Battle of the Whispering Wood. And while he fights valiantly during the battle, and then talks an ungodly amount of shit after the fact, the beauty that is Jaime Lannister's arc doesn't really start to show itself until the end of A Clash of Kings. One of the most interesting chapters for Jaime is actually Catelyn's final chapter in Book 2, where she releases him. This chapter is the first time we've seen Jaime in a long time, and he looks like shit. He's lost a bunch of weight, he smells, he's unkempt, but even though he's a shell of who he was just a few months prior, there is a level of charm to him that even Cat, someone who hates him, can't deny. And in this chapter, which is what I would consider the first real time that Jaime gets properly characterized and steps into a major character role, we see the Kingslayer persona start to crack. Jaime, who spends this chapter drinking, talks about the gruesome deaths of Brandon and Lord Rickard Stark, trying to justify the killing of Aerys. But Catelyn, not in the mood to hear his shit, essentially dismisses everything that he says to just, Jaime's an awful person. But then, after she releases him and orders Brienne to draw her sword, the emotional labyrinth that is the mind of Jaime Lannister starts to become plain to see. This is a man who's ridiculed and mocked for his one decent act, and he blames the world for it. But what's interesting to note, and what adds a whole nother level of depth to the situation with the Mad King, is Jaime never really tries to tell anyone why he really did what he did. And his simple reasoning for this is he just didn't think anyone would listen, but the more complicated answer is deep down, I believe Jaime hated himself for the act itself. I stated previously that Jaime killed the Mad King not only to save the small folk, but for his own personal reasons as well. And Jaime despises himself for that. There is this really interesting story in A Feast for Crows where Jaime talks about how Arthur Dayne slayed a mad knight called the Smiling Knight. The Smiling Knight was this man without armor, who mocked his foes, and was known for a number of nefarious and dishonorable traits. But Sir Arthur Dayne gave him a respectable death nonetheless. And in this moment, Jaime realizes that while a young man he dreamed of becoming Arthur Dayne, instead somehow along the way, he became the Smiling Knight instead. You see, Jaime doesn't tell anyone about the Mad King and what he was planning to do, because he is inherently self-destructive. And up until A Feast for Crows, symbolized not so subtly by his relationship with Cersei, Jaime has a bad habit of destroying the image of who he wants to be, because he doesn't think himself deserving of anything more. After slaying the Mad King in order to save the innocent people of King's Landing and his family, he hates himself for it. So he sits on the Iron Throne, accepts the name Kingslayer, and actively feeds into it because that's what he thinks he is and what he deserves. Jaime knows that he is the furthest he can be from the likes of Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, Barristan the Bold, and Sir Duncan the Tall, so he embraces the only thing that he has left and feels he is deserving of: the Kingslayer. This is also worsened by the fact that the two people in his life closest to him, that being Tywin and Cersei, actively feed into the Kingslayer persona, and don't encourage him to get closer to who he originally wanted to be, and instead push him to be more cruel, hateful, and cutthroat. But this all changes when he meets Brienne of Tarth. Brienne is a beacon of hope for Jaime that fundamentally shifts the way in which he views the world. When he first meets her at the start of A Storm of Swords, Jaime is at his most jaded and nihilistic. This is a man who has completely lost any sense of self. The child that desired to be a gallant knight has been crushed under the weight of real-world pressure and circumstances. His toxic relationships have left a rift in his life, and he is just a shell of who he once was physically due to the fact that he's been rotting in a cell. And he makes sure Brienne knows that he is miserable, constantly calling her ugly, a wench, and other vile names of that nature. He even tries to kill her with his own two hands in order to escape. However, along the way, something interesting begins to happen. Jaime finds himself slightly respecting Brienne, telling her that she's an incredible fighter. But beyond that, Jaime sees something in her, even early on in their journey together, that Brienne doesn't see. Brienne is bright, and even though she may be physically unattractive, her soul is ethereal, which subconsciously starts to break down some of the walls that Jaime has had built up for decades at this point. Which is why we see Jaime save Brienne from getting raped in the first place. In this moment, Jaime doesn't really fully comprehend why he's doing what he's doing. He just simply sees someone he's grown to care for in his own way in trouble, and decides to help in any way that he can. And at this point in the story, Jaime has just had his hand cut off by Zolo in order to send a message to Tywin. And so begins what I would consider one of the best character arcs in fiction. The loss of Jaime's sword hand marks a pivotal change in his life. Jaime's sword hand is his life. It's his reason for existing. It's what he's leaned on, and it's what's kept him alive. And not just that, it's kept him him. And I think there's a lot of poetry in Jaime's hand being used to send a message to Tywin, since Jaime's sword hand is what always got between them in the first place. Which is something that will be relevant later on when I discuss Jaime's final interaction with Tywin. Once Jaime loses his hand, he begins one of the most profound character arcs that I've ever seen. Jaime 4, A Storm of Swords, which is the chapter immediately following the loss of his hand, has Jaime in the most depressing state he will be in the entire story. His world has been shattered. His wound is rotting. He's in immense pain, and he's delusionally thinking back on all of the pain, suffering, and mistakes that he's made throughout his entire life. And even still, when Brienne is about to get raped, he still sticks his neck out and prevents it. And then, when they arrive at Harrenhal, he instructs Qyburn to take care of Brienne as well, showing that deep down, even this early on in Jaime's story, he does care about Brienne a great deal, even making her a priority when he has been permanently maimed. Which brings us to Jaime 5, A Storm of Swords, which is where the legendary bathtub scene takes place. In A Storm of Swords, Jaime 5 is the chapter where the Kingslayer finally stops being a villain in our eyes and becomes a man. In the steaming baths of Harrenhal, stripped of his armor, pride, and hand, Jaime confesses to Brienne the truth that's haunted him since Robert's rebellion. He tells her how King Aerys, the Mad King, had planned to burn all of King's Landing, every man, woman, and child, with hidden wildfire rather than surrender. Jaime watches it unfold, powerless, until Aerys orders him to bring him his father's head. That's when Jaime kills him, killing the pyromancer first, then Aerys himself, saving the city but earning the name Kingslayer. And no one cared to hear the truth, least of all Ned. The confession breaks him. The shame, the years of silence, the pain all boils over. For the first time, Jaime admits who he really is. Not the wall that is the Kingslayer, but Jaime, the boy who tried to do the right thing and was condemned for it. But unfortunately, the chapter ends with Jaime leaving Brienne of Tarth behind to go back to King's Landing. This chapter closes on a dark note. Jaime's honor and humanity are resurfacing just as the world around him grows colder. But it's not a black and white chapter where Jaime just becomes a good person. Jaime decides to leave Brienne here, which is a very real and very awful decision to make. Here Jaime has walked into a dead end in the labyrinth that is his subconscious. With the loss of his hand, he can no longer be the man he once was. But with that being said, the toxicity, arrogance, and poison that was Jaime for the last decade still lingers and affects the Jaime of the present. But for what it's worth, I'm glad Jaime left her here, because if he didn't, we wouldn't get what I consider to be the single greatest chapter in A Storm of Swords. Jaime 6, A Storm of Swords is a monster of a chapter, and some of George R. R. Martin's best work. This chapter encompasses Jaime leaving Harrenhal and then returning back to save Brienne from the bear. While on the journey to King's Landing, Jaime is in immense pain, so he has Qyburn give him milk of the poppy, and he takes a nap on a tree stump. This stump ends up actually being a weirwood stump, which informs the wild dream he is about to have. Jaime dreams that he is being lured down into the caverns of Casterly Rock by his father and sister. While at the base of the stairs, he is thrust into this dark abyss. He shouted, but the fall was short. He landed on his hands and knees upon soft and shallow water. There were watery caverns deep below Casterly Rock, but this one was strange. "What place is this?" "Your place," the voice echoed. It was 100 voices, 1,000, the voices of all the Lannisters since Lan the Clever, who'd lived at the dawn of the days. But most of all, it was his father's voice, and beside Lord Tywin stood his sister, pale and beautiful, a torch burning in her hand. Joffrey was there as well, the son they made together, and behind them a dozen more dark shapes with golden hair. "Sister, why has father brought us here?" "Us. This is your place, brother. This is your darkness." Her torch was the only light in the cavern. Her torch was the only light in the world. She turned to go. "Stay with me," Jaime pleaded. "Don't leave me here alone." But they were leaving. "Don't leave me in the dark. Something terrible lived down here. Give me a sword at least." "I gave you a sword," Lord Tywin said. Now armed with a flaming sword and his sword hand, Jaime is left in the dark, seemingly alone, except for Brienne, who appears behind him, armed with a flaming sword of her own. Brienne in this moment is a beacon of light and hope in this cavern of darkness that is the inner psyche of Jaime Lannister. He describes her as this light. In the light she could almost be a beauty, he thought. In this light she could almost be a knight. Now Jaime and Brienne, armed with flaming swords that are their lifeline, are confronted with the sins of Jaime's past. Behind Jaime appear the creatures that have been terrifying him for so long. The ghosts of the Mad King's Kingsguard, and Rhaegar Targaryen himself. Jaime's heroes, the men who he idolized, are ghosts in front of him, mocking and ridiculing him for his decisions. Prince Rhaegar burned with cold light, now white, now red, now dark. "I left my wife and children in your hands. I never thought he'd hurt them." Jaime's sword was burning less brightly now. "I was with the king, killing the king," said Sir Arthur. "Cutting his throat," said Prince Lewin. "The king you had sworn to die for," said the White Bull. The fires that ran along the blade were guttering out, and Jaime remembered what Cersei had said. No. Terror closed a hand about his throat. Then his sword went dark, and only Brienne's burned, as the ghosts came rushing in. But right as Jaime and Brienne are about to die, Jaime screams and wakes. Now armed with this dream, what Jaime must do is clear as day. He must go back and save Brienne. This dream is one of my favorite moments in A Song of Ice and Fire. The weirwood tree that Jaime rests on triggers a vision in which for the first time in his life, he is forced to come face to face with his guilt, the mistakes that he has made, and the disdain that he has for his own existence, and it inspired him to be better. Marching back into Harrenhal, jumping into the bear pit, and for the first time in his life, he decides to put his life on the line for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. And at the end of the chapter, after saving Brienne, she asks him why he came back for her. And he has this to say: "Sir Jaime, even in soiled pink satin and torn lace, Brienne looked more like a man in a gown than a proper woman. I am grateful, but why? You were well away, why come back?" A dozen quips came to mind, each crueler than the one before, but Jaime only shrugged. "I dreamed of you," he said. In losing his sword hand, in losing the object that gave him the physical capacity to wield a sword, Jaime becomes the closest thing to a true knight that he's ever been. And while I wish I could just end this video here, just saying Jaime's arc ends with him trying to be better, that's just simply untrue. Jaime Lannister is a human being, whose mind is a labyrinth, and his long journey of change and potential redemption has just now begun. This chapter marks the start of the marathon, not the end of the race. Jaime 7 A Storm of Swords finds Jaime returning to King's Landing, attempting to regain part of his old life, but slowly starting to understand that it's no longer something he can have. He has sex with Cersei, but realizes she doesn't truly love him, at least not in the way he loves her. And then the chapter ends with Tywin disinheriting Jaime, because Jaime tells him that he doesn't want the rock, and even without a hand, he still wants to be a knight. And Tywin's dismissal of Jaime is their final scene together, and it's incredibly interesting. In this chapter and in this moment, Jaime is trying to find common ground with people and the life that he once lived, but realizes that in order for him to move forward, he can't half-ass it. In order to change, he has to cut out the darker aspects of himself, root and stem, which explains his actions in his final 2 chapters of A Storm of Swords. Jaime's final chapters of this book have him trying to rebuild the Kingsguard. Now Lord Commander, Jaime looks through the White Book and notices how accomplished his heroes are compared to himself. He notes that Jaime Lannister's accomplishments end in the White Book with him simply killing the Mad King, while someone like Barristan has pages and pages of legendary deeds. So he decides that while the man who was Jaime Lannister wasn't the knight he wanted to be, it's not too late, and he's going to dedicate the second half of his life, post losing his hand, to becoming Golden Hand the Just, a knight of true honor. So he revamps the Kingsguard, settles long-term beefs between Loras and Brienne, and ends with his final act of storm being committing Brienne to saving Sansa Stark. He notes at the end of the chapter that Sir Gerald Hightower had begun his story, and Sir Barristan Selmy had continued it. But the rest, Jaime Lannister would need to write for himself. He could write whatever he chose, henceforth, whatever he chose. And so the cataclysm that is the emotional journey of Jaime A Storm of Swords concludes. And his arc in this one book is without a shadow of a doubt one of the most emotionally complex and beautiful things that I've ever seen put to page. And somehow it gets even better in A Feast for Crows. Jaime's arc in A Feast for Crows is one of the most interesting arcs in the whole series, because it's an arc where his character progresses in a very strange and unpredictable manner. At the end of A Storm of Swords, Jaime releases Tyrion and finds out that Cersei has been sleeping with other men, that Tyrion hates him, wants nothing to do with him, and Tywin is dead. So now Jaime finds himself in a very strange position, where outside pressure isn't directly affecting him as much as it was before, but instead he's feeling the pressure that has been a large part of his entire life regarding what kind of man he really wants to be. A major part of Jaime's conflict during A Feast for Crows is trying to figure out what's left for him after A Storm of Swords. He doesn't have a clear answer, and we see him try to find one during a large portion of the story. One of the ways he tries to accomplish this is by being more Tywin-esque, but in a moral way. During Tywin's funeral, we see him try and take up the leadership role in the family dynamic, by advising Cersei and Tommen on how to deal with the loss of Tywin and the disrespect they have been feeling. Then, in Jaime 1, during Tywin's funeral, Jaime spends the whole 7 days reflecting on his own guilt, his duty, and his identity. He blames himself for his father's death and recalls Rhaegar's last words before the Trident, hinting at reforms that Rhaegar wanted to make but never had the chance to. Jaime also reprimands the King's Guard for obeying Cersei's lethal orders without asking him first, showing his growing independence from her. This chapter also has Cersei approaching Jaime and pressuring him to serve as her hand, but Jaime refuses, further straining their bond. Then later, he comes to the conclusion that they are just drifting. Jaime is transitioning from Cersei's loyal twin to a man that's trying to define himself by his own standards. Haunted by guilt, yet beginning to assert control and distance himself from the toxicity that has been running his life. This is only reinforced by Jaime too, when Jaime clashes with Cersei over her paranoia and poor choices. In this chapter, he realizes that she's starting to remind him of the Mad King, which further breaks their bond. These first 2 chapters show a profound change in Jaime, and demonstrate how he is handling and dealing with the labyrinth that is his mind. Then, in Jaime 3 A Feast for Crows, he leaves King's Landing, and begins his journey to Riverrun. And the second he leaves the city, he continues to develop as a character. He begins training every night with Ilan Payne, believing that if he can regain some semblance of skill with the sword, that he will be taken more seriously. And he even runs into Ronnet Connington, a man who was once engaged to Brienne. However, Ronnet mocks her to Jaime's face, and Jaime hits him for it, breaking some of his teeth, showcasing how far he has come since he started his journey with Brienne. Because if you remember, he used to call her every name under the sun, and now the slightest bit of disrespect towards her causes him to lash out. The quote is, "Why, I went to Tarth and saw her. I had 6 years on her, yet the wench could look me in the eye. She was a sow in silk, though most sows have bigger teats. When she tried to talk, she almost choked on her own tongue. I gave her a rose, and told her it was all that she could ever have from me." Connington glanced into the pit. The bear was less hairy than that freak. Jaime's golden hand cracked him across the mouth, so hard the other night when stumbling down the steps. His lantern fell and smashed, and the oil spread out burning. "You are speaking of a highborn lady, sir. Call her by her name. Call her Brienne." There's also this sweet moment where Jaime runs into Pia, a girl who he had protected from one of the Mountain's men in the past. One of the Mountain's men had tried to rape the girl at Harrenhal, and had seemed honestly perplexed when Jaime commanded Ilan Payne to take his head off. "I had her before, 100 times," he kept saying as they forced him to his knees. 100 times, my lord, we all had her." When Sir Ilan presented Pia with his head, she had smiled through her ruined teeth. In Jaime 5, he finally gets to Riverrun, and what he uncovers not only about himself, but about the world in this chapter, is shattering for him. When Jaime reaches Riverrun, he starts to see just how hollow the Lannister power really is. The Freys are chaotic, and the siege itself feels pointless. Jaime realizes the strength he thought his family had was built on fear and not loyalty. Then his aunt Jenna, who he hasn't seen in years, grabs him by the ear and knocks the wind out of him by telling him just simply how the world works. She tears into Cersei's arrogance, the family's decline, and finally tells Jaime that Tyrion, not him, was Tywin's true son. It's a moment that shatters the image that Jaime has been clinging to. For the first time, he starts to understand that living up to Tywin was never the answer, and that he has to decide for himself what kind of man he really wants to be. Then, in Jaime 6, we have one of the most interesting moments in Jaime's entire arc. Jaime is in a tough spot, because he needs to take Riverrun without killing anyone, or he would be betraying his oath to Catelyn to not bear arms against the Tullys. So he comes up with this plan to scare Edmure Tully so drastically that he gives up the castle without a second thought. He thinks about how Tywin would sometimes end wars with just a singer, by playing the Reigns of Castamere. So Jaime leverages that aspect of his father and tries to apply it in a positive way, telling Edmure that if he doesn't surrender the castle, this will happen. When the castle falls, all those inside will be put to the sword. Your herds will be butchered, your god's wood will be felled, your keeps and towers will burn, I'll pull your walls down and divert the tumblestone over the ruins. By the time I'm done, no man will ever know that a castle once stood here. You'll want your child, I expect. I'll send him to you when he's born. With a trebuchet. But it's important to understand that Jaime never actually wanted any of this to happen. In fact, he only makes the threat to avoid bloodshed. And for me, this is a full circle moment for Jaime. Jaime is described in the earlier books as someone who acts before thinking, and often causes a lot of damage because he doesn't place enough value on life. However, this is a Jaime who is intelligent and patient, a man who truly values human life and is willing to think outside the box in order to protect it. Jaime Lannister is a changed man. Maybe not a fully redeemed man, but a changed one. And this change is beautifully capped off with him burning Cersei's letter, requesting him to return to King's Landing and potentially die on her behalf. It's a moment of a man who's been manipulated and abused for his entire life, taking a step in the right direction to break free from his abuse. However, Jaime has one more chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire, and it is one chapter in A Dance with Dragons. When Jaime arrives at Raventree Hall, he finds himself in the middle of yet another conflict. Two ancient houses still fighting over grudges older than anyone can remember. The Brackens want land, the Blackwoods want dignity. And Jaime sees for the first time how meaningless war is. He's no longer the man who would solve things with blood. Instead, he tries to end the standoff with words and fairness, something his father would have never done. But the victory feels empty. Every siege, every parley, shows him how shallow this all is. Jaime's growing numb to it all. He's tired of the fighting, tired of the pretending, tired of lying, and tired of the world in many ways. As he rides away with young Huster, his quiet disillusionment settles in. And then Brienne of Tarth appears out of nowhere, battered and broken, claiming that she's found Sansa and begging him to follow her. It's a moment that shakes Jaime out of his moral drift and gives him a new purpose. However, we know that Jaime isn't following Brienne to Sansa, but instead Lady Stoneheart. And for the final part of this video, I want to discuss Jaime's future in the Winds of Winter. And honestly, I have no idea what on earth is going to happen when he gets to Lady Stoneheart. I do believe he will survive, though, because ultimately I think Jaime Lannister's story is meant to end related to Cersei and not Lady Stoneheart, or possibly he will die in the Long Night with some kind of grandiose sacrifice in order to end his life as the honorable knight that he always wanted to be. All in all, Jaime Lannister is one of the best characters, not only in A Song of Ice and Fire, but in fiction in general. He's a man whose entire life revolves around walking through the labyrinth that is humanity, and trying to change for the better. And while I don't believe he is fully redeemed, and I wouldn't even blame you if you believe that he could never be redeemed, at this point in the story, the true beauty of his arc isn't the redemption itself, but instead just watching him try his best to get there. I just want to say, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I put a lot of work into this video. I want to start ramping up the quality of my content, but I don't really know where to go from here. So if you have any really cool video ideas, anything you want to see me talk about, or if you want to talk to me at all, please let me know in the comment section down below, or feel free to join my Discord server. I'm always taking video ideas from there, and I promise if you give me something good, I will do it. Jaime is a character that's impacted my life a great deal. As a man who has a lot of regrets and has done a lot of things that I wish I didn't do, it is very refreshing and motivating to see someone who has just fallen so far off the horse try his absolute best to hop back on and be a better man. To me, Jaime represents the idea that human beings can truly change as long as they want it bad enough, and as long as something occurs that inspires them to change so drastically that it's genuinely impossible for them to ever go back to who they once were. I do not believe Jaime's character arc will end the way it did in Season 8, where he regresses back to bare minimum. I really do not think that's how his arc is going to go. And he is definitely one of the characters I am looking forward to seeing the most in the Winds of Winter, assuming it releases, which I believe it will. But with all that being said, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching, genuinely. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.